3 years ago, I posted a video called Life is Too Short, which was a recap of an experience that I had with a blood clot in my leg. In it, I reflected on how it started with this slight tingling sensation in my calf muscle, but then eventually became so painful that I could barely walk on it. I remembered going to the emergency room after blood tests and an ultrasound came back positive, and even having a nurse take a needle and teach me how to inject myself in my own stomach in order to administer the blood thinning medication. But I also remember walking out of the hospital and noticing the sick and the injured people around me and reminding myself of just how fortunate I was, because at least it seemed like I had a pretty straightforward and easy path to getting better. Well, I was thinking back on all of that, and this new idea came to me. One that connects me, the blood clot that I had, and my family. And it's an idea that I think brings about a bit more awareness to just how vulnerable we all are, how fragile our bodies really can be, and how connected we all are. This idea came up particularly because I was thinking of my dad. You see, I'd say we have a fairly poor relationship. When I was a kid, I used to call him my best friend, but now, in a nutshell, we've just been through some very turbulent times. Feelings and actions never get acknowledged, and it's really difficult to have an open and vulnerable conversation with him. As I've gotten older, I've really started to see all of that history begin to build up underneath the surface and show itself in my own personality in ugly ways. I've teetered along experiences of depression. I can be very self-critical. And I've seen the darker sides of my personality at times get the best of me. Now, not all of this is attributed just to my dad, of course, but the more that I dive into the world of self-improvement, the more I learn that our childhood experiences and the relationship that we have with our parents really plays a lot on our subconscious mind. And this has been something that's weighed heavily on my mind for quite some time now. Well, one day I was trying to think of the things that I am grateful for, the things that he taught me. As a police officer and an avid runner and weightlifter, I remember often watching him work out in this home gym that he had. When I was about in 3rd grade or so, he encouraged me to try to do a push-up and to hang from the pull-up bar that he had and try to do a pull-up. Now, obviously, at first, I could only lower myself to the ground. I couldn't push myself back up at all. And bringing myself even 2 inches closer to the pull-up bar seemed impossible. But I really looked up to my dad back then, and so I stuck with it. And before you knew it, I could do a complete push-up and pull-up. I even remember this one time, my 3rd grade teacher, who was this cycling and fitness enthusiast, was showing us how to do a push-up, and was really impressed when I was able to show the class that I could already do 10. So obviously, my dad did have some positive influences on me. Well, one of the most noticeable and physical characteristics of my dad is this set of huge veins that runs up his forearms from all the working out that he does. Especially because of his kind of blocky physique, it really does make him look tough and strong, kind of tank-like, and from the perspective of a little kid, invincible. Well, as he's gotten older, naturally the body starts to change, and a couple of years ago I learned that he has something called atrial fibrillation. This is a fairly common condition in which the heart starts to beat irregularly, and it's dangerous because it can increase the risk of a blood clot forming, making its way up into your brain and then causing strokes. In order to prevent this, a pacemaker needed to be installed into his heart to keep the rhythm in check, and he has to be on blood thinning medications for the rest of his life in order to prevent any clots. When I was in the hospital for my blood clot, the doctor told me that if I were to ever get another blood clot again in the future, which, by the way, the chances of that go up if you've already had one in the past, then I would need to be on blood thinners for the rest of my life too. This was a scary thought because not only do blood thinners just make it much more risky to get into any kind of accident or to have an injury, but they would just make it a lot more worrisome to continue doing the outdoor activities that I love to do and which bring me joy. Well, around the same time that I learned about my dad's condition, my uncle, my dad's brother, who's had a number of debilitating strokes, had yet another one. It made it really difficult for him to speak and to be understood. And I can only imagine how frustrating and terrifying it would be to have even a single stroke, let alone to recover from it and then go on to have multiple other ones. My dad's parents, my grandparents, also suffered from blood-related ailments. When I was, I think, about 6 years old or so, give or take, my grandfather passed away from complications with diabetes. Because I was so young, and because I couldn't really communicate with him, since he didn't speak very much English, I didn't really know what was going on. But I do remember being very confused and shocked when I saw him laying in a hospital bed after having to have one of his legs amputated. On the other hand, I never got to know my paternal grandmother. She passed away when my mom was still pregnant with me, but the story that I learned was that she died very suddenly from a brain aneurysm, which is essentially the bursting of a blood vessel inside of your brain. Ironically, this happened on her birthday. So one day, not too long ago, I'm sitting down and just reflecting on all of this, just thinking about how suddenly these things can happen and just change everything. With my arm on the table, I turn it over and I'm staring at this huge vein that runs up the side of my right forearm. Especially if I've been working out and my arm is hanging by my side so that gravity can pull the blood down towards my hand, it really sticks out quite a lot and is very noticeable. I've even had a number of people in my life tell me that they like the way that it looks because it makes me look stronger and more fit. And it's true, it really does make my forearm look a lot bigger than it really is, especially compared to the rest of my relatively skinny arms. But here I am, staring at this thing, just kind of thinking about how it's supplying blood and oxygen to my hand, to my arm, allowing me to literally climb mountains, swim through the ocean, or carry my baby niece in my arms. And yet it sticks out so much and it's so close to the surface of the skin that you would worry that you could just pop it with a pin. But then I turn my hand over and I'm looking at the veins on the back of my hand. And in that moment, I see a resemblance to my dad. I see it in the color of my skin, in the texture of the tiny wrinkles on the back of my knuckles, and the slightly bluish tinge of the skin right above the blood vessels. I see his genes showing themselves in my body. And then I look back at this huge vein that's snaking down my arm, and I realize that, despite our rough relationship and our differences, we're the same. We're connected. We're connected in a way that makes us strong, and yet at the same time in a way that makes us vulnerable. It's the blood flowing through our veins, and yet at other times perhaps that blood isn't flowing well enough in the case of a blood clot. It's the circulatory system that carries this shared bloodline that we have, and yet it's that same bloodline that carries all the defects to that same system. But then I wonder, maybe this is something that we can bond over. Something that's built right into us. And perhaps these veins that we can see in our arms are a symbol of how delicate life is, or how our time here is limited. Maybe one day, both my dad and I are destined to exit this life with a bursting blood vessel, or a clot somewhere in our bodies. Maybe what really connects us is this shared vulnerability. I know that sounds kind of morbid, but it does make me wonder if, in some weird way that we can't fully understand, the universe has been pleading with us to change our relationship to one another and to recognize and appreciate this shared vulnerability. Maybe changing the dynamic of all of our relationships, especially if they haven't been working or providing us fulfillment for decades, is the best way to accelerate our own expansion, and as a result, the expansion of the world around us. Well, these are all things that I've just been grappling with and thinking about a lot lately. I think, whether I like it or not, a lot of the things that I'm trying to work on for myself that seem very individualistic and personal just to me really do stem from those childhood experiences or the relationships that I have with my parents and my siblings and grandparents, etc. maybe there's no way to really grow personally without addressing those other people in my life as well. And it does make me think that maybe the conversations that I need to be having with my family are what they think connects them to the rest of our family, connects them to all of us. What are their shared vulnerabilities? How do they relate to their parents and their grandparents and their siblings? If you've had any of these conversations with your family and you've made any kind of changes with them, I'd love to know how you did it and what worked for you. Because I think that this is something that maybe isn't thought about as often as it should be, but is very universal. And again, like I mentioned earlier in this video, the more and more I learn about just general self-improvement or wellness, the more and more this idea comes up of who we are as adults and our tendencies and our habits and our personalities really were shaped years and years ago when we were kids, when we were just soaking up information and examples from other people like a sponge. And if we can't learn to understand and recognize all of that history and that past, we're going to have a very difficult time recognizing who we are now and how we can grow from it into the future.